This is Conversations with Cait, a podcast centered on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. I'm Cait Malalay, and for today's topic, we will be discussing the banning of books by Republican lawmakers across states, specifically Texas. In November, Texas Governor Greg Abbott urged school boards to ban books that he described as pornography. Matt Krause, the chair of the Texas House's General Investigative Committee, created a list and urged public school libraries to take down any books that might generate discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of a student's race or sex. The books on this list shine a light on people of color, the LGBTQ+ community, and sexual health. In response, a group of librarians started the grassroots initiative #Freedom, that's capital FR lowercase EADOM, to combat this censorship and bring school librarians together. For today's guest speakers, I have Emma Kaplan, one of the leading representatives of NYC Revolution Club, which are followers of Bob Avakian, the chairman of the Revolutionary Communist Party USA and theorist of New Communism. And secondly, Jacob Quinn, a Snowbelt region representative of Turning Point USA. Yes, listeners, you heard that correctly. A follower of BA, Bob Avakian, and CK, Charlie Kirk, supporters of two very different ideologies, one left and one right, because here at Conversations with Cait, I strive for neutrality. First off, we have Emma, a follower of Avakian. Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us today via Zoom. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and talk to you today.
What are your thoughts on this book ban by these Republican lawmakers?
It's a whole attack on the truth, you know? These fascist Republicans, they really don't know anything about, critical race theory. But they're using it as a catch-all buzzword to incite and inflame white resentment and suppress any discussion about systematic racism of Black people and other people of color. And they flip things upside down and they say that even just acknowledging the history is in of itself racist. And part of what this is this is part of this is both a part of a framework to kind of override the facts of racial oppression, that these are just anomalies from the goodness of America, despite the overwhelming evidence that white supremacy has been foundational from the founding of this country and going up until today with mass incarceration, police terror. They want to cover up that framework and say that those are anomalies. But it's also part, and I think that this is really important to understand, that this is actually part of a whole fascist remaking of society where you have, they have unleashed a massive coordinated legislative campaign at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, targeting education. And I wanted to urge people to go to revcom.us. There's actually a piece by Rafael Cadares that he wrote on this called "The Fight Against the White Supremacist Fascist Whitewash and the Fascist Suppression of Historical Truth." And he's talking about this whole battle. It was a 3-part series that he did on that. This is part of a whole fascist attack and profound divisions and that have existed in this country but are now coming to a head. And the looming possibility of actually a civil war, that these people, these Republican fascists who were seen attacking education, who were seen outside of the school boards against the vaccines, that are in the courts and in the highest levels of power, in the military, in the police, they are getting ready. This is all part of a fascist takeover.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott urged school boards to ban books that he described as pornography. Matt Krause, a Republican in the Texas House of Representatives, in a letter to the Texas Education Agency and superintendent of school districts around the state, urged public school libraries to look out for books that might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race or sex. Most of the books on the list center on people of color, the LGBTQ community, and sexual health. Historically, people of color and the LGBTQ community have been stereotyped as hypersexualized. What is your reaction to Abbott's association of the term pornographic or obscene material when these books center on these communities in particular?
It is part of the fascist triage of white supremacy, misogyny, xenophobia, patriarchy, which I actually include transphobia in that it's the anybody who challenges sort of the traditional gender norms, they see that as a problem, and they're looking to violently reassert these fascist norms. And I wanted to really urge people to kind of related to this. I think, one, it's a lot of crap, but it's part of something bigger and deeper that I think that all the people who care about justice and equality and trans rights and Black people and people of color, we have to confront that this is something that is reflective of a much deeper problem. And one thing that I wanted to just quote from, called Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating: Profound Crises, Deep Divisions, the Looming Possibility of Civil War, and the Revolution That's Urgently Needed, where he talks a lot about what's underneath the surface of what we're seeing here and what does it reflect. And in it, he quotes from this Republican, Stephen King, I think is his name. And one of the things that this guy said was that, one side, our side, and he's a fascist. He's talking about the GOP. He says, our side has a trillion bullets, and their side can't figure out which bathroom to use. Now, that's incredibly transphobic, obviously, in language, but there's a point that he's making there. There's something deeper and there's something bigger that they're getting ready for. And we better confront that, and we better figure out what it's actually gonna take to not only stop that, but to seize this rare time, this moment, to actually bring into being something emancipating. I think that the title of that talk, Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating, I think that that's kind of what gets concentrated in what these Republicans and their program they're fighting for.
Back to Krause's letter, Republicans have been obsessed with this woke culture. What is your response when they say these topics of racial inequality are a form of psychological distress for children and say that it is in itself inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive?
Obviously, like the thing that they hate most about, the woke and people who say that they're woke or whatever, is like this idea that there is institutionalized racism. That's what they're opposed to. Part of the fascism is this whole way that they actually want the truth covered up. They want a situation where the truth is covered up, where dissent is outlawed, where critical thinking is stifled, white supremacy, male supremacy, and other oppressive relations are more aggressively enforced. This new work, and he actually has a critique of wokeism, but not from the perspective of that the problem is that they're acknowledging institutionalized racism, but the problem is that, one, that it actually doesn't go deep enough into what and that you're not going to change things by just changing some terms. You're not going to change things by creating a safe space. You're not going to go up against these fascists by telling them to check their privilege. It's just insane, And in this piece, he's struggling with all the people who do see institutionalized racism and all the horrors that's created, to actually take up a scientific understanding of what the problem is that we face and why nothing besides an actual revolution, an all-out fight to overthrow this system, is actually the way that we're going to get humanity free. And lining up behind the Democrats is not going to get us to where we need to go, because they're fighting this in a way where they're compromising, but they're also representatives of the same system. And so do we want to go back to those norms? Those norms were not really all that good to begin with.
Do you see this as an example of history repeating itself? If so, how or in what way?
Part of the history that is repeating itself is that, for a long time, the actual history of this country has been covered up. And how many of us in school, a lot of us got, taught that, you had slavery, and then there was something happened, and Abraham Lincoln, and then Martin Luther King, and here we are. And there's not really, until that book, the 1619 Project, came out, and that whole, not just the book, but the work of Hannah Nicole Jones that really put a lot of this together, which is one of the books that they're trying to ban, the 1619 Project, which you can get at Revolution Books, by the way. And I encourage everybody to read that book, because it does get into the whole, what is the actual history of this country, and that we've been lied to, that despite all of its faults, America really is a force for good in the world. And so that has been a certain narrative that has existed even before this ban, but there's a way where even the challenging of that, to challenge that lie that we have been told, is being met with the full force of the state and banning that. That's a difference than what has, existed before, at least in the past, decade or so.
Most of the articles that I've read, the authors are comparing this to Nazi Germany. Do you see this as an example of history repeating itself in this instance of banning books?
That definitely is a parallel. And the lesson here, that we take from that is that there was a time where people had the chance to stop it, where people had the chance to, before Hitler had fully consolidated, it would have mattered if all of the professors and all the college students said, we're not going to go along with this, as soon as they were seeing some of what was beginning to develop. And I think that that's the lesson here.
According to a 2019 Washington Post article, library officials in northwest China, to demonstrate their loyalty to the Communist Party, declared that it had removed illegal publications, religious publications, and deviant papers and books, picture books, and photographs in an effort to fully exert the library's role in broadcasting mainstream ideology. We are in a culture war. And GOP officials state that they believe that this woke culture is being pushed, or as they say about critical race theory, which was quite the buzzword last summer, is a form of indoctrination. I actually picked up a copy of Avakian's Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating, Profound Crisis, Deepening Divisions, the Looming Possibility of Civil War, and the Revolution That is Urgently Needed. And he writes, to put things in provocative terms, it's time to leave that God stuff alone. That will never lead anybody to get free. We need a lot less of this God talk and a lot more talk and action for revolution, real revolution. Can you discuss more about Revolutionary Communist Party USA's values? And would this push for a revolution include the censorship of certain books by Republicans, or religious texts for that matter?
Good question. But I think that question, there's also a constitution for a new socialist republic in North America that we have at Revolution Books. It's authored by Bob Avakian that actually talks about the role of dissent. And no, we would not, there's nothing in that constitution that says that we would ban books.
This is going to be the last question before we wrap it up here. What are some solutions or ways do you think that we as a society can combat this censorship?
One, I would really recommend that people dig into and read this talk by Avakian. Read it, spread it to a lot of people. We're going to do a massive social media campaign in society so that people understand what it is that we're up against. Two, people need to stand up. People need to protest. Anytime there's been fascists who've come around in New York City and different places, people have to start standing up against this and not let them have the public square. And three, people should join the Revolution Clubs, follow those points of attention, go to revcom.us every day and come to Revolution Books and debate and discuss and get into all of this with us.
Emma, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a happy new year.
Happy New Year.
Hi, Jacob. Thank you so much for joining us today via Zoom. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. What are your thoughts on this book ban by Republican states?
I believe that this is not a good idea with Republican states because at the same time, even at Turning Point USA, we might not always see eye to eye with different viewpoints, but we never would wish to silence them. You know what I'm saying? So we would prefer that there wouldn't be any banned books and that we could just, have an open dialogue would be preferred.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott urged school boards to ban books that he described as pornography. Matt Krause, the chair of the Texas House's General Investigative Committee, created a list and urged public school libraries to take down any books that might generate discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of a student's race or sex. The books on this list shine a light on people of color, the LGBTQ plus community, and sexual health. What would you say to someone who says that these books are not harmful but rather educate the younger generation?
Well, I would leave it up to personal choice, and that's what we kind of stand for at TPUSA. Is I would leave this up to personal choice. If this, we don't want to not have any book out there because it makes somebody feel uncomfortable. Because we have to feel these feelings. This is a new concept of not more of today's generation than it has been before. Where I'm feeling a little hurt. Let's not talk about it at all. We should talk about these things now. Do I agree with pornography in schools? I mean, I guess it really just depends on the age. K through 6 maybe not, but high school. I mean, there's already sex education and whatnot, so I don't see why. It's per person. Everyone's a different situation, so I would leave it up to the person. Once again, I kind of stress with the freedom of choice situation.
TPUSA is about limited government, but what are your thoughts that Republican states, even though TPUSA leans conservative, is out to censor these books?
Well, the great thing about TPUSA is that we actually, since we're a 501c3, we're not right or left. Like I said, we're just here to educate. What I would say for these Texas organizations, I think, or these Texas government officials, I think that they have a job to do, and that is to appeal to the taxpayers and the voters of that state. And like I said, it's really just it's more or less, the situation isn't really applicable across the board. The world isn't black or white. It's a lot of gray shades. So I think what they're doing might work well for them, but I wouldn't advocate this for a national scale of how it should be handled.
How would the children be given personal choice if it is the school boards that are on the lookout for these books, as encouraged by Abbott and Krause?
Well, they can still have personal choice. The best way to handle these kind of situations would be if they feel it is in their best interest to keep these books, they should organize and educate, and they should appeal to their school board and get their parents or whoever whoever in their family might pay taxes or pay the school tax in that local area. Because, just like how they're advocating to get rid of these books, you could put the glove on the other hand and say, we need these books. And, it's really just how bad you really want it. If they really want this, they could definitely advocate to keep these books. It's just whether or not they're going to go through all the steps to keep them.
Do you see this really as a form of protecting the children or just a censorship and culture war of which party dominates?
See, that's a tough one. I think that in Texas is very old school, so to say. So there's a part of me that thinks that they're just trying to protect their youth. But it's a very red state, if not probably the reddest state in the nation. So I think it'd be a little bit of both. I do believe that they believe their intentions are good. But I also believe that maybe some of it's driven in old school policy. You know, I like I said, it's not nothing we could apply nationally, but for the state of Texas, I mean, they're pretty red.
What would you say to individuals who see this as history repeating itself, specifically its relation to Nazi Germany's censorship of material?
I think it's relatable. I think that anytime people want to censor books, unless, in my opinion, as long as it's not anti-American rhetoric, I don't believe we should be censoring any books. You know, I believe that all books are should be given a chance to at least be read and like discussed with dialogue. But at the same time, as long as they're not talking about like the destruction of America or burning flags, I mean, I don't see why they couldn't have these books. It's similar to Nazi Germany's burning of the books, but I wouldn't call it like, I wouldn't say it's exactly the same.
I did some research on the censorship of books done also by communists. According to a 2019 Washington Post article, library officials in northwest China, to demonstrate their loyalty to the Communist Party, declared that it had removed illegal publications, religious publications, and deviant papers in books, picture books, and photographs in an effort to fully exert the library's role in broadcasting mainstream ideology. We are in a culture war. And I noticed one thing that TPUSA has a habit of is calling the left commies or communists. GOP officials state that they believe that this woke culture is being pushed, or as they say about critical race theory, is a form of indoctrination. Can you discuss more from the conservative perspective? How do you define woke culture? And do you see this more as an attempt to stop this woke culture, being that books on this list center on the LGBTQ plus community and people of color?
You know, to touch on what woke culture is, you know, from my understanding and what I've seen since I've started working with TPUSA, you know, it's kind of like this. You know, everyone has a right to an opinion, but when people try to silence that opinion and say and call them names, like you said that TPUSA refers to certain people as communists. Now, I haven't firsthand really witnessed that, you know, but at the same time, it's tough, you know. I mean, like what I do is grassroots community work. You know, I'm just trying to organize and educate students. I think that I think that what woke culture is to TPUSA is trying to push a certain ideology onto someone, and if they don't believe in it, that same group would go to cancel the group that is being pushed this information on. And, you know, so the woke culture, and then the books on the LGBTQ community and people of color, I don't necessarily have enough knowledge about this Texas situation to really give a solid opinion on it. But, you know, if history does repeat itself, and at the same time, I do believe that there are some things that are, I wouldn't call it communism, but I would say that there are some factors that are going on in today's America that has a very close similarity to these topics. I think that they're not, obviously it's not just like communism, but I mean at the same time, I can't say for sure because I haven't read the books, to be honest with you.
Well, I can tell you one of the books on the list was New Kid by Jerry Craft, about a kid who's a person of color who goes to this prestigious school. And in that school, it's majority white. And the other book was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, personally one of my favorites.
Like I said before, I feel as if these state officials are really just trying to appeal to their taxpayers because, you know, none of these books would be censored in New York because, you know, we really see censorship kind of depend and vary on the location on which they're being censored by. We're almost trying to separate people by races and certain features, you know, people of color or, you know, LGBTQ, and I think that anytime that they're trying to make these separations, it kind of inherently becomes a little bit racist and whatnot. And that's that. I don't agree with that. I know TPUSA doesn't agree with that. I think that everybody is equal in their own right, and that I think that all these new ideas with these critical theories and the woke culture, I think we're just products of our time. I think that we should really focus on what's important, and that's building back our economy and growing our future tomorrow. The commie thing, though, it's tough because, like I said, we do have a generation of people that everything's got to be equal and kosher, and if it's not, there's outrage. And the world was never set up to be like that, unfortunately. We can try our best, but not everybody's going to make it to like $1 million a year. But that doesn't mean they're any less important. It just means that that's how the world is. If you work hard and try your best, you can get to these things. But at the same time, people who like fight and believe that everything should be equal across the board, I could see that being communists or even socialism.
Jacob, this is going to be our last question of the day before we wrap it up here. What is your response when the left says that this is a form of a fascist takeover? In this case, education.
Oh, well, honestly, I would say to these people, get in your history books and Google 1930s Europe. This is far from fascism. I think that in today's culture, people don't realize that there are certain topics that, again, every topic shouldn't be off the board to at least learn and discuss. I think that discussion on any topic is the best way to learn more about it and to either come to an understanding or come to a mutual agreement that it's either good, bad, or indifferent. But I don't know. I do believe that the more and more we talk about sexually charged topics in school to a generation that, they're really undeveloped. I mean, I know that when I was, K through 12, I really didn't know a whole bunch about life. It wasn't until I started getting involved in college, which I believe college is the perfect place for these books and perfect place for these discussions because, we've had a little bit of experience in today's world. We've gotten a little taste of what it is, and then college is supposed to shape you, give you all these ideas, and then after college, you really can go out into the world and really make a difference. I don't believe it's fascism. Like I said, look up Italy, look up Germany, look up all those extreme cases where they really were fascist and people would die over it. Nobody's dying over certain states banning certain books. Like I said, I would be more concerned if it was on a national level or maybe a national organization was really pushing for banned books, but that's something you won't see out of Turning Point USA because, like I said, we're open dialogue. We might not always agree on certain topics, but we would never look to silence anybody.
Jacob, thank you so much for joining us today via Zoom. We appreciate your time, and I hope you have a happy new year.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Cait, a podcast centered on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. Be a part of the conversation. What are your thoughts on this book censorship? What are some solutions that you can come up with to stop these book bans? Use the hashtag freedom, that's capital FR, lowercase EADOM on Twitter. You can also follow me on Instagram at Kate_Malalay_rights. That's CAIT _MALILAY_rights, WRITES, for updates on articles and future episodes.